Okay, it's my first conversation after the debacle of lead poisoning in 2024, but that's a whole other thing. Today, I'm joined by the very lovely Yolanda from Storytoob, who has finished From with the Elderlings about a month, 6 weeks ago.
Yeah,
Actually,
about
longer
6
than that.
weeks ago. Yeah, I finished it in February, so I
Yeah.
don't remember when. So yeah, 2 months.
So we're here to pretty much go through the now traditional debrief of how did that go. But first, introduce yourself. For all that I've raved about you on my channel, some people may not have subscribed yet, and they should. So take it away, Yolanda.
Hello. I have come with 2 cats to bribe you into liking me. I'm Yolanda. I'm one half of Storytoob, which is the channel that I have with my partner Carlos, who is not here because he has not read Realm of the Elderlings yet, which is absurd, really, because I have not shut up about this for 2 years. But he will get there. We're working on it. And I'm very, very happy to be here. I actually haven't. So yeah, I finished about 2 months ago. I haven't listened to any spoiler discussions, which is usually what I do when I finish any of the sub-series. Haven't listened to any discussions, barely read any reviews, like some, but like not a lot. I've just been sitting on my thoughts and processing. So this is
I
my
feel
first
incredibly honoured that that's the case. That means I'm going to get pretty much your fresh thoughts on this.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. All right. So we'll go back to the very beginning. When did you start with Farseer? When did you first open Assassin's Apprentice? And we're doing full spoilers, people. It's my channel. Full spoilers, whole series. We're not going to do the whole, wait for half an hour while we tiptoe around stuff. There is too much to talk about to do that.
There's so much to talk about. So I read Assassin's Apprentice and the entirety of Farseer in April of 2022. Yeah. And it actually, funnily enough, happened like Carlos and I discovered BookTube in like summer 2021 because we were both looking into to find some new fantasy and sci-fi recommendations and just like get back into the genre. And we discovered BookTube. We found Sanderson, Abercrombie, all the usual suspects. Greenbone Saga was huge and like whatever. And once we after our like weekend bookshop tour and trip, we were having a pint afterwards and just talking about all these authors that we found and the ones that everybody talks about. And we were like, a lot of the big ones that every single channel talks about seem to be men, even though there are a lot of female writers, and especially like there are a lot of female writers that people talk about now, but they tend to be very, very current. And like, where are the ones that were writing in the 90s and even before that? But like, like contemporaries of George R.R. Martin. And we mentioned Robin Hobb, and we'd only bought Assassin's Apprentice at the time. We bought it maybe a couple of months before. And you were like, why is nobody talking about Hobb? Which a lot of people are now, but I feel like at the time, not as many people were, or not as prominently, or big channels. And you're like I've been seeing her in bookshops my entire life. Like, she takes up an entire shelf because there's so many of them. And why have I never read it? I was like, you know what? I'm just going to read Assassin's Apprentice. It's only 300 pages or 350. So like, I'll just throw it in and like see what it's like. So I think I was about maybe 100 pages in, 150, and I was sobbing and ugly crying over Smithy and first over Nosy. And I was like, oh my God, I need to buy the other 15 books immediately.
Yeah, pretty much.
So then I kind of binged the first trilogy in April, and then I did live ship in June. No, live ship in July and Tawny Man in August. So I did those three in 2022, and then I took a bit of a break. But
that's actually ideal. I do say to people to try and take a break after Tawny Man. But I'm really glad that they were all out, that you could literally just do the thing. Because for everything after False Fate, I had to wait. And that was hard. To be fair, initially it wasn't, because False Fate was going to be the last one. So I didn't know I
Yeah.
was waiting until suddenly there was new books in the series, which was very exciting. But it was traumatic, to say the least.
Yeah.
But and
Imagine.
it's an experience that it's almost sad that new readers now, when the books are all out, you don't have the finality of events in False Fate, because you know there's a trilogy later called Fits in the Fall. So there isn't the same, oh my God, this is real. This is happening. Yeah. This could actually be the end. He might actually be dead. You know, and so the grief is real. Like, you're genuinely like, this is over.
Yeah.
So that range of emotions is just more extreme, without knowing that actually it's going to be okay. Yes, you still feel it. You're like, oh my God, how is he going to get out of this? But you know that he's going to. So, but
absolutely,
really, that's the only thing.
I kind of wish that they hadn't called the last trilogy Fits in the Fool. I feel like they could have, like, it's not a title that, it absolutely needed to be called that. So it is a bit of a spoiler. Like, I wish it wasn't, because like you said, like you still get that, oh my God, how is he going to get out of it? And like, it's still really emotional because you're with Fitz and you're feeling what he's feeling. But like I never believed it. Like, maybe there was like a shred of doubt of like, but like you never really believe it. So yeah,
that's probably the only thing about the fabulous part of having all of the books available. It's that just that one thing slightly detracts from the enjoyment of that False Fate. So, but other than that, I mean, I think the utter rubbishness of the book names help. The names themselves are terrible. I mean, you're in a bookshop, so I'm guessing you get the what's the word I'm looking for? The type of reader who is perhaps looking for something a bit more daggers in the night, assassin-y, when they pick up Assassin's Apprentice. Now that you've read it, is that a discussion that you have with people who pick the book up, that this might not be what you're looking for?
It is, yeah. And I actually get more the opposite, where I will recommend the book and they see the title and they're like, oh, I don't know, if like assassin stuff is not really my thing. And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not that kind of assassin stuff. Like, yes, he is trained as an assassin, and like within the titles, the titles of Farsi are probably the most appropriate ones.
Yeah.
But it's not this like, oh, he's a badass assassin kind of thing. Like, that's not what the focus is. Like, he's almost more of a spy than an assassin, I find. So yeah, it's more that I'll recommend the book, like if they're looking for like, a character-driven fantasy or something, and I recommend it, and they're like, and I need to like kind of get over that title, and sometimes they still don't want it. I'm like, that's fair enough. Like, but also you're missing out.
But that's the thing, and I think that's it's possibly the biggest disservice to the books is the name of that first book, because for that very reason. So I'm really glad that you picked it up. When you say that you were into it pretty early and you're like sobbing over the dogs, understandably, I still do it. I've literally read those first 9 books. I've read 23 times. I still will sob my heart out, knowing everything that happens. And yet at the same time, I do often forget, with a new reader, quite the impact. I know with our lovely channel friend Evie, who we were discussing before we recorded, the devastation in poor Evie's heart when Nosy was lost to us in the second chapter. I'd just forgotten to sort of warn her about that, knowing her connection to animals. And so I do occasionally have to be reminded about just how hard-hitting some of these things are. What were the things that sort of impacted the way you saw characters based off of those events? Because I know it can take it takes people a little while to warm up to Burrick as a result of Nosy's situation. Were there any other moments like that you sort of think stand out?
So Yeah, like Beric for sure. I I don't think I know some people hate him like from the beginning at the beginning based on like how Fitz is perceiving things.
Yeah.
I don't think I hated him, but I certainly didn't love him the way I now love him.
Yeah.
um as flawed as he is, but I was wary of him. I'm not sure I was entirely certain that Nosy was dead.
Yeah.
Like I didn't fully think that Berg had killed him because I'd already gotten a sense of like this guy cares about animals. Like, would he really kill the dog, or has he just like sent him
Mhm.
out into the wild to maybe die by himself? But like, has he killed him? Like, I wasn't sure. Um. So, but yeah, I was certainly wary of him for a long time. Well, not that long a time really, because the book is not that long, and I like by by the end of Assassin's Apprentice, I was in
Yeah.
love with him. But
Yeah.
she packs so much into it. But
Mhm.
there are so many characters that she introduces, and she uses perspective
Yes.
so well. Because we see things through Fitz's eyes. And sometimes I had to, like, throughout the 9 Fitz books, I had to remind myself, pull myself out and say, no, you're seeing this from Fitz's perspective. Like, this
Yeah.
is not the objective truth. He is an idiot.
Yes. But he's
um,
our idiot and we love him.
yes. Yeah. So there's a lot of instances, I can't actually think of any particular ones now, where Fitz meets characters that we've met before in like Rainwild or Live Ship, and he has a certain opinion straight away, and I'm like, no, no, honey, no. Like, give them a chance. This is not um but in general, she even does it in in the third person perspective, which I find so impressive, and how she changes a character. I mean, the obvious one is Malta, right?
Yes.
In Life Ship, who I hated
Everybody
so much.
does.
Everybody does. And then at by the end of the trilogy, I was like, but she was a child.
Yeah.
Like,
You're ready
what?
to forgive it immediately.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I actually feel so bad for hating her so viscerally, because I was like,
Yeah.
she was a kid. Like, she had the father that she had. She was raised in a certain way to care about certain things. This is what she was told she
Was
should
important. Yeah.
be. Yeah. And then she's in this situation where she sees herself losing everything that she's been raised to think is the most important thing for a person, and a young woman especially, to have. And you just feel sorry for her. Like,
Yeah.
like, it's not. Yeah. And I love how she essentially completely changes our perspective on the character, but
Yeah.
Malta is still the same person. Like, her
Yeah.
her core
Her
being
core.
hasn't changed. Yeah. I that's one of the reasons I can't wait to reread the entire series. Like, I'm
Yeah.
I'm the most excited to reread Life Ship, and I'm so excited to get to Malta and see her. I wonder if rereading it, I will dislike her again a
Oh,
little bit.
yes. She is insufferable. Those early chapters of Malta, she is insufferable. But you're more willing to forgive it the second time through because you know that she's going to grow up.
Yeah,
Um,
poor thing.
she's
I
hard.
feel so bad.
I do find it entertaining, and you will now also, as you, when Carlos gets to those chapters, you're going to love it so much. Saying to him, "You're going to love her," and he's going to be like, "I am never going to like this character,"
Yeah,
and you're going to have the joy of going, "I told you so." That's going to be fun for you.
I can't wait.
Because it's one of the things I love in spending time in the Hog threads, and I
Mhm.
really appreciate it when people are really sort of checking in with updates, which sort of leads me to my next thing, which is you've been part of Discord, you were part of all the Discords when you were going through. How did you find the experience of having people who hand read or were reading at the same time, having that community to talk to as you went through?
Oh, so great. So I joined Discord after I finished Life Ship. And it was in big part because I finished Live Ship, and I don't know if I've ever had the experience to that degree of finishing a series and not being able to stop thinking about it. It was just life-changing, and I listened to a couple of spoiler discussions, one of them being the one on Jimmy's channel, and I was like, I need to talk to these people. I need to talk to these people that are talking to each other. So I joined Jimmy's Discord and then a couple of others, but primarily Jimmy's, and started talking to people about it. And so then when I got to Tawny Man, thankfully I was I was talking to people, and it was a really enriching experience. But especially I think when you get to those more emotional bits, and I'm thinking of the end of Fool's
Yeah.
Errand. Oh well, full spoilers. We can talk about
Yeah,
it.
we can talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Night Eyes dying. I don't think I have cried that much. I actually, there are 3 books that have made me cry to that, to an approximate level
Yeah.
of that. But like Carlos was concerned. He was looking at me. He was like, "Are you okay? Like, what is happening?" And then
Yeah.
I like put the book away, and then I would be doing other stuff and think about it, and just randomly start crying.
Yeah. Fair enough. Although I do have to interject, what are the other 2 books?
Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows
Yep.
and Lightbringer, the
Okay.
Pierce
I haven't
Brown
read that
one.
one yet.
Yeah, yeah,
All right.
yeah.
I just needed to know.
Yeah, yeah, like Deathly Hallows. I mean, always gets like it got me more the first time. It
Yeah.
gets me less now, but the
Mhm.
first time I read Harry walking into the forest at
Yeah.
the end, I had to stop reading because I couldn't see the page.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there are moments where you're so in it with the
Yeah,
character and you feel all their feelings, and it can be really overwhelming. So
yeah,
I know that for quite a lot of readers, they read Night Eyes' End and have to read it again because they're like, what just
hmm,
happened? Um,
yeah,
I think it's possibly one of the most beautifully written death scenes ever, because it is just beautiful. And again, I couldn't read the page through tears. It took me a long time to read it because
yeah.
um, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not sure whether or not it shows up in the first read. So I'm curious. And that, did you sense Fitz's sort of numbness, that sort of closed off grief that he goes through after Night Eyes goes?
Not straight away, not straight away, but it was something that as we then go through like Golden Fool, like it because it stretches. I can't remember like. It's something that I really appreciated about Tawny Man when I finished
Mm,
Tawny Man.
yeah,
How Fitz's general state of like um emotional well-being is handled. Like even in Fool's Errand where Night Eyes is still around, and then like those first couple of 100 pages was just him in the cabin, and like Hap is there and the Fool shows up, which is just like wonderful.
yeah,
But even there, like you start Fool's Errand and immediately you're like, oh, I'm sad. This like
yeah,
there's an underlying sadness to all of it. And then when you get to the end of the trilogy and you understand that Fitz was kind of partially forged by putting his
yeah.
memories into the stone. Oh my god, I thought that was such a beautiful way of, to me anyway, of saying you need to deal with
Yes,
the stuff that happens to you. You need to deal with your trauma. You need to confront your heartbreak, because if you don't, it it will demand that you do it at some point. It will come crashing down on you. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to do that,
yeah,
and to make it magical, and completely changed my entire perspective on Tawny Man, because I did feel, but I wasn't sure what I was feeling. So I did
yeah,
notice reading it that Fitz is different. There's an energy that's in him in Farseer that's not there. And like but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And then when you get that, I was like, oh, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And she does it so subtly, and it's so good. So I'm really excited to reread it for that reason,
Yeah.
and just looking out for it and knowing what she's doing and that she's doing it on purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the theme work that for me that happens in the series is exceptional, and
Mhm.
where, as you say, she's used this tool of the stone taking memories to show, that you need your trauma to be a whole person. You have to
Mhm.
deal with it. You have to integrate it into yourself. And she shows us this in a couple of different ways. She does it with Kenneth, I think, most
Mhm.
spectacularly,
Oh,
in that he is literally incapable of being better, which you don't really realize until later. Because I know for myself, reading Live Ships, the first time I read Live Ships, when he reaches the point where he becomes utterly irredeemable
mhm.
in the final book, I I felt betrayed as a reader. I was like, no, he was on a redemption arc. And it was only on my second read, because at this point I didn't have a book community to talk stuff out with. It was only on my second read that I noticed that actually, no, he wasn't. It looked like he was making the right choices, but he wasn't making choices. He was just reacting to things.
Yeah.
And at no point does he ever decide to do something good. And he's never emotional. He's never actually in a moment. He's always removed from it, seeing it from
Mhm.
outside. And so the complexity of his character is perfect to really show what you take from yourself when you deny parts of your history.
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of ties in for me to a much bigger theme around memories kind of forming personhood, and that your memories are your identity, and
Yeah.
without them, who are you? Which it's a beautiful thing for me.
Mhm.
But when we talk about memories and identity, and um, how it forms your personality, and we're in Live Ships, how did you feel around the existence of Live Ships and what they are and what they represent? I mean, everyone loves Paragon, but were there other Live Ships that you were attached to, or tell me about the ships?
That's, you know what? It's a great question, and it's something that I'm still kind of working through. um, I to begin with, I love the concept of the life ships, because I'm I get very attached to physical objects. I
Mm-hmm.
imbue them with personality and memory. Like we were, before we started recording, talking about books and like the physical copies that you have, right? Like being like a little capsule of who you were when you first read it. And I feel like that about a lot of objects that I love or that I've had for a long time. And the idea of the live ships literally carrying the memories of their families to the point that they become, yeah, live ships, that they're alive and they have like their own personality but mixed in with all of their lived experience and like their family. That's such a cool concept, and one of my favorite magic concepts, I think, in any fantasy. But of course it's Hobbes, so it's not as simple as that, even though it was already a cool concept. And then we get the reveal that they're dragons and that they're trapped and that they weren't meant to be ships, and that they're um have been robbed of their agency, and it becomes something a lot more complex. And like so much of live ships, the trilogy, is about agency, and and the your freedom and your right to make your own choices, and they don't get that. And but then of course you're also following the human characters whose livelihood depends on the ships, who didn't know what was going on and what they were, who didn't make that decision. So it's such a complex, it's such a complex question.
Mm.
So when I was reading Fits in the Fool.
Yeah.
And Paragon shows back up, which,
Yeah.
I mean, fist pump moment. Um,
I love that scene.
Oh,
I can see it. If I could draw, I could make a painting of that. I can see the moment with Fitz and Amber standing on the dock and Fitz seeing Paragon and Amber kind of going, I can explain. I can see that moment in my head so clearly. It's funny.
It's so great. I knew Paragon was coming, and like ever since, like a couple of books before, and I was thinking like, oh, we'll get a ship there, and I was like, a ship, you say?
Gee, who could be available to do that?
But I hadn't put two and two together of Paragon's figurehead until like maybe the chapter before. And when I realized, I was like, oh my God, what's about to happen? Oh my God.
Yeah. There's a moment of daytime soap opera-ness about it, where you can almost hear the melodramatic music and you're like, dun, dun, dun. So yeah. cut to an ad break as Fitz looks at Amber. And yeah.
But yeah, so I was very happy about that. But then obviously we have the live ships becoming dragons and all that happens. So, and that I struggled with. And I struggled because I was so upset for Brashen and Althea.
Yeah.
Not so, and I think I would have been less upset if I was in their POV and I could get them dealing with it.
Yeah.
I didn't get their POV because we're with Fitz. So seeing it through Fitz, and Fitz obviously doesn't care because he's just met them and he cares about B. So it was very frustrating that I was like, but they had a very good ending at the end of Live Ship. I'm so attached to them, and now everything is turned upside down, and I don't know. I'm not having their conversations. I don't know how they're doing. Please tell me how they're doing. So I was very upset, while at the same time, obviously wanting Paragon to become the two dragons. Which, how cool is that? And
so cool.
Which again, I'm like, oh, so like there's an extra layer to Paragon and his struggles. It's not just the whole like Kenneth like the Ludlook situation and like the trauma, and like it's also this like struggle of he was literally two beings. Like my mind went to like, you know, like personality disorders and things like that. Like, oh my God, like this is so great. Just so much depth. Oh my God, that's one of the most well-written characters in literature that I have read, and it's a ship.
That's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I don't know how you felt. I mean, obviously you found the Discord conversations after Live Ship, but a lot of people they have a lot of trepidation going into Live Ships because the concept of talking ships feels silly, because the only thing at this point you can really relate it to is like Thomas the Tank Engine, which you're like, okay, how can that possibly make for an amazing story? That just sounds ridiculous. And it's only through reading it that you realize just how much of a person each ship is. I mean, Paragon is my favorite character of Live Ships, and he's a ship.
It's amazing.
You know, it takes some skill for sure, but another thing that I found quite fascinating is that break in personality that we see in Paragon obviously keeps going all the way through from Live Ships into Fitz in the Fool, where you've still got aspects of your very young feeling character within him, and occasionally you get glimpses of someone older and wiser. How do you feel? Because I mean, even after this many rereads, I'm still not entirely sure how I am with it, about the fact that Althea lives on this ship who contains the essence of the person who assaulted her. Where do you stand with that? Because I've only recently found a way to describe it to myself. So, you know, I mean, how does that sit with you? Is it something that bugs you still? Because I know it bothers a lot of readers.
It bugs me. It does bug me a bit. But more so just because I feel so protective of Althea. I think the way I saw it when I finished Ship of Destiny was that like I was happy with the ending of Ship of Destiny. It like very, very delighted, and like delighted with Althea and Brashen staying with Paragon, and like that made a lot of sense to me. But Paragon taking like Kenneth dying on Paragon's deck and Paragon having Kenneth's eyes did bug me, and it bugs me. I think it was mainly just because there is so much gaslighting going on towards Althea, which is, I think that entire sequence, one of the most difficult things I've ever read. But
Yeah.
I really appreciate how it was done because it's so
It's
real,
so real to life. It's yeah.
which makes it so frustrating, right? Because you're like, oh God, and there's particular people that are the worst ones,
Yeah, oh yeah.
like Vivacia, or Vivacia. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Yeah. And you feel betrayed. You're like, how can you,
Yes,
of all characters?
yes.
Yeah.
Like there's a feel like Jack as well. I was like, fuck you.
Yeah.
So like all of this happens and nobody believes her. The people that do believe her choose to ignore it. Like Edda believes her, but she can't deal with it.
No.
So
So she's like, no, I believe that, but
I'm not dealing with it, to the point
yeah.
that she still names the child after Kenneth,
Yeah.
which oh
Yeah.
like I have empathy for her. I do, more than I do for Wintro, because Wintro I was like, no, we're done. I actually don't care. I do have empathy for Edda, but it frustrated me that she couldn't go that extra step and say, no, he was a bad person.
Yeah.
So all of this was going on and I was so angry. And
Yeah.
then it's not like Paragon joins in on it, but Paragon is still like, but
Yeah.
Kenneth is also my family and he was a child on my deck and I protected him and all these things, which you can't expect Paragon to then in that situation be like, yeah, no, don't care about that guy anymore.
No.
That's just it. If that had happened, you'd have been like, that makes
Yeah.
no sense.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very complex. So I can't say I would change anything from a storytelling perspective, but as somebody who got like projected a lot onto Althea, I am still upset.
Yeah.
I'm still upset. Like I'm upset that she has to deal with that on a daily basis. And still like there was a Beloved really, really, really angered me in Fits
Yeah.
in the Field. And I wanted to ask you, like, when, like now or later, whenever, like how you like feel about that, like in general, like their attitude with Fits and everything. But like, there was a particular moment where they're on Paragon and they're talking about Kenneth, and Althea says something like, "Oh, he was a horrible person," and Amber says, "For some."
Yeah.
And I was like, how
How
dare
very
you?
dare you? I had that moment. I will admit. I was like, no. Oh, I got very angry. I did.
Yeah.
I see the literary reason for it, because Amber is our slightly removed character, and that she's not
Yeah.
human. She has this longer lifespan. She's looking at events through this different lens. So she sees that to a lot of the world, that is how the situation looks. That Althea has claimed this event happened, and most people don't believe it. So she's stating that, yep, to some people,
Yeah.
it comes across terribly because she's also a woman who was there talking to another woman. So and unless you remember to go, okay, it's also the fool who's at this distance.
Yeah.
It's very offensive, like really offensive to hear. I was not happy. I thought I'd have slapped you for that. Seriously, I would have knocked her head around. But I've only recently, and again, I have an advantage over almost every reader, having read it so much. And the fact that it has taken me this long to find a way to express to myself what this symbolizes in terms of trauma is this is, for me, a way of representing a person who's been abused by a person in their family, where their family doesn't support them and their family doesn't stop that person visiting. So the victim has to then deal with the person who's abused them on a regular basis for the rest of their life, knowing that almost everyone around them doesn't believe them. And having to face that trauma on a daily basis, and that it is a trauma that you're facing every day. And I liked finding a way to put it for myself, even as I recognized just how awful it is that happens, and that there are people who have to live with that around them in terms of the energy around them. And it works in terms of the way the entire series deals with trauma, and that everybody has trauma of one kind or another, and you don't know what it is. And you don't know of what people's behaviors are coming out of a traumatic response. So you might think they're being irrational. You might think they're just being stupid. But as somebody in a book, you're in their perspective. You know what's caused it. You know that they're lashing out because this trauma happened however many years ago. And that perspective thing that Hobb does so well, you see that. You see that too in The Golden Fool. You've got Laurel's cousin, bound up in a cave, and Fitz is almost berserk with rage. He's going to beat this boy bloody. And you know that this is his trauma response to having been tortured to death. And it takes Night Eyes to bring him back from the brink. That young man will always see Fitz as an almost berserker, violent, horrible man, even though we know he's just this beaten boy who lashes out. And that perspective is made easier because we understand.
Yeah.
You know, we've seen what causes that. I mean, it's one of the things, sort of taking the story as it goes to dealing with trauma and all the rest of it. I've spoken, obviously, with a lot of people about the series, and I spoke with Emily from Emily Reads, and she works with special needs children. So when she read The Rainwilds, she saw a lot of parallels between the Rainwilders and Tats and being othered as representing a lot of our special needs people. And whereas I see it as a very feminist sort of story. So I'm really interested because I've heard so many ways of viewing Rainwilds, because it does lend itself to it. Did you come out of Rainwilds with a lens on it? Did you sort of think this was an expression of, othering, feminism, societal outcasts? I mean, sort of, because I have a lot of thoughts about Rainwilds.
I think Rainwilds is a lot deeper than people give it credit for. Before I get into it, I like your perspective on that Althea and Paragon a lot. That actually helps me process the end of Assassin's Creed for them as well, because that now I can see it not as them having lost something, but as like she can finally move on entirely. So that's nice. My baby.
I'm glad that helped.
But Rainwild, so I saw it quite feminist as well. I definitely read it as a lot about bodily autonomy. Of like, you get to decide what to do with your body and nobody else, whether that is in terms of like relationships with other people, or whether it's like how you express yourself. Like, could be a metaphor for, you know, like how you dress or you do your hair, but it could also be like further than that, like how you present in terms of gender, like all these kinds of things. Like that's kind of the lens that I read it through, I think, probably because it was the easiest for my mind to latch onto in terms of like
Mhm.
my experience.
Yeah.
But especially through Tamara, I think I read it a lot like that. Like, yeah, autonomy, like bodily
Yeah.
autonomy primarily, but in general, just like following a little bit from the themes in Life Ship of, um, yeah, your freedom to make your own choices,
Yeah.
but with a slightly different angle on it, like more about less about like what you do and more about who you are, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going into Rain Wild, I was lowering my expectations because everybody tells you to.
Well, yeah. Yeah. It was impacted so badly by the explosion of YA and publisher
Yeah.
interference that the first two books, they are too long. They do focus too much on the young people, and those aspects weren't author choice.
Mhm.
So if you don't know that going in, it can be a real downgrade.
Yeah.
Having said that, by the time City of Dragons is released, that explosion of YA interest has died down a lot. So we get a more adult focused story from that point
Mm.
on. So it takes that step back up to what we're used to from Hob. But it can really affect readers because they do go in and go, oh my God, the YA tropes and the love triangles and oh, so much relationship drama. And yet, even still, those first two books have a lot of meat to them.
They do. I
Mm.
was just gonna say, I actually like the first two more than the latter two
Mm-hmm.
because I just loved the dragons.
Yeah,
And like, and I saw, I think, like this like more the feminism angle with
yeah.
the actual kids, and the dragons were fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that. Like the fact that they come out like all wrong and that they haven't had like the, you know, the process that they should have had, and um oh my god, I'm forgetting her name. What's the grown dragon that we have? Um
Tintaglia.
yes, Tintaglia, of course. How could I forget? I'm sorry. Tintaglia. She leaves them, right, and has
Mm.
basically no faith in them surviving and goes away. And the Rainwilders are dumped, which with what they perceive to now be all like no gain, right? Just an
Yeah,
investment, a bad investment.
yeah,
Um, and then they decide to just dump the children they don't want with this bad investment and hope that they cancel each other out.
yeah.
And I loved everything that's going on there. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually, I think everything with Alice and Cedric on that journey in the first two books is fantastic. And I also just love journeying on boats. Like, I find it so
Yeah.
funny when people review Life Ship, they usually say, like, oh, I'm not into nautical fantasy,
No,
but this was great. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay, where is all this nautical fantasy that you guys don't like? Because I love ships and I
yeah.
don't
And
see them
there's
anywhere.
all of it out there. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, again, this is the joy of BookTube is getting other lenses to look at this through, and talking to Emily again with the otheringness of the special needs equivalent was her
Mm,
saying this is how society treats our special needs. They get sort of shuffled away to their ends and sort of, oh, we're going to ignore you, because rather than you are still valid people and you have
mhm,
skills, we just aren't helping you find them. We're not helping you to be the best you can be, which we see
mhm,
obviously as the dragons find the right environment and the dragon keepers find that more accepting lifestyle, and they all flourish, and they flourish wonderfully into different people, like
mhm.
literally different. um,
Yeah,
but I loved seeing that lens,
yeah.
um, that Emily gave me, because I see it every time I read Rain Wilds now. I can see the parallel. I can see what she's saying. My issue I have with a lot of particularly male readers, oddly, is because they tend not to pick up so much on the feminist side of things and bodily autonomy and those sort of things. They tend to just be really grumpy about the love triangle. And I'm always struck by it going, but Tamara doesn't want either of these boys. Her choice is to not choose, and she doesn't have to. That's the point. And somehow that gets called a love triangle. Where did you sit with that?
Yeah, so I had heard going in all these things. I'd heard like, oh, there's a love triangle and YA tropes, and it's all very like, and I was like, well, you know what? I actually don't have a problem with YA. So like, there's plenty of YA that I enjoy, and like I like Hobbs, so I'm sure she'll write good YA, so I don't care. But I was still like prepared for just a different thing. And then I read Dragon Keeper, and I was like, this is just as good. I love this. Her writing is great. I think this is deep. I don't understand what people are going on about.
Yeah.
It does feel like Dragon Keeper and Dragon Haven should have been one book, but like outside of that, and I knew like that there was interference with the publisher and whatever. Yes, when people say there's a love triangle, I have learned that people generally mean, oh, there are two people interested in the same girl, and that is automatically a love triangle and annoying.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, like Tamara didn't want either of them. She tells both of them to leave her alone. It's their choice not to. And I also just think that you're taking a group of young people who have been ostracized their entire short lives so far, and specifically told that they are not fit to marry or to have children or to have partners because they shouldn't be alive in the first place. And now you're taking them out of that environment, putting them together. Like being young and hormonal isn't enough.
Yeah. They've had that really strong restriction taken away. Yeah.
And you're telling me that is not exactly what would happen? Of course it would. I thought that was extremely realistic, and that we actually get a lot of perspectives. You get people like, what was his name? The guy that ends up dying, that was an asshole.
Good.
Yes. You get somebody like him who just tries to take the opportunity to manipulate everyone into doing what he wants, and get power. You get people like Tats or Rapskull, both in different ways, but that are both like, freedom, yay, my friend,
I'm gonna do my thing.
Yeah. And then there's Tamara, who's more careful just by nature, and isn't just gonna break the rules before she has thought about it and knows what rules she wants to break and why, which I actually think is a very mature perspective for somebody of her age, and for something that people just call YA tropey. So I think I don't know, it's just speculation. It definitely feels like if there was publisher interference to bring some more YA-ness into it, that she did, but only on the surface level. Like what's beneath it is very much still Hobb writing very real characters in fantastical situations that are still very real situations. So I don't think that qualifies as a love triangle. If she's not interested in either of them, or like she's trying to decide who she's interested in, that's not a love triangle. That's just two lines.
Yeah, it is. and I do feel that something that gets overlooked almost is this sense that this is still what women face today. It's when the man decides he needs to be involved with a woman, it doesn't matter how often she says no. And it's only the claim of another man that makes them back off. And that happens now. How many times do we see the trope of somebody sitting in a bar and she'll say to the bloke who approaches them, I have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
She doesn't have a boyfriend, but she's learned that the claim of another man will supersede her own opinion. If she just tells this guy to back off, he's going to be like, oh, why don't you? And there's that fear of then aggression. So I really appreciated being shown very viscerally that it doesn't matter what Tamara says, she's still getting this pressure from the boys around her. I liked that. I liked that a lot. And I also appreciated, as you said, she's far more careful. She's trying to figure out what rules to keep. And while she's young, she's trying to figure out the why some of those rules were in place. Whereas one of the other young girls, Jerd, who has taken this freedom very much to heart, and sexual revolution has happened, and she's making time with all of the boys, which the boys all think is fabulous. And she becomes pregnant, and Tamara is the one who sits there with the repercussions of that, and she gets really angry about it. She's like, but now you've taken an active person out of this community that needs every person to be active because you're pregnant. And what happens if something happens to you or the baby? Now you're an extra burden. And suddenly there are all these reasons why those earlier rules were in place. And so when we get to the scene where Jerd loses that baby, and you have the scene where this baby is displayed to all of the girls, this is the outcome of your choices. Really in your face. Think about it. You know, and yet you see Jerd goes back to the way she was. It makes almost no impact on her. And yet the other two girls have very much taken this to heart. That while in the spur of the moment, the boys think this is wonderful, the long-term repercussions is going to be on them.
Yeah, I thought that was very well done. Because it is on them, and like everything that happens to Jerd shouldn't be just on Jerd, but it will be, and it is, and Tamara recognizes that a lot more than, or like a lot sooner than anybody else does. Because I think initially, and Tamara is kind of angry at Jerd, and I got annoyed. I was like, well, let her do whatever she wants. Like, more power to her, you know, which is a very modern, we have contraceptives.
It is.
Looking at it.
Yeah.
And then when she gets pregnant, I was like, oh, yeah, not a good idea, actually.
Oh, yeah. But yeah. It's but again, even that becomes nuanced because they don't have this contraceptive availability or freedom to make those choices. What then are their choices? You know, what risks are they prepared to take? And they're young people. I mean, they're at the most risk-taking time of their lives. So it is a dangerous path to be treading. So it was, I really liked that part of it, where we're going to talk about the fact that this is part of their experience as young people, that they have this other path they've got to be aware of as well. And I really liked that, because we've got the adult point of views, where you've got Elise and you've got Leftrin, who are watching this concerned, but knowing they can't interfere. And I think that's the case with any adult watching teenagers make mistakes. It's like, I can tell them, but they're not going to listen. Which is really cleverly done.
I also think that the romantic relationships between the adults and the like teenagers, or like however old they are, read different. So she's doing it very purposefully. Like Leftrin and Alice have a very different dynamic, and oh my god, they're so wholesome.
They know.
I think is it like the first time they meet, and we're like from his perspective, and he's all taken with her, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, and you can see the moment in his head, like this glowing light almost on her, going, oh, you know, this woman of his dreams. And it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful to read, because at this point we only really know Elise, I mean, we've met Lefton. He's like, yeah, he's a competent bloke. He seems like a decent fellow. Fabulous. But we know Elise. We know she's in this awful marriage. We know that she's been not necessarily abused, but certainly mistreated by life, ultimately. And so it's really lovely to see her be treasured by somebody immediately. You know, it's just, oh.
And it's so nice from her perspective to, how do I want to phrase this? Because she has never really been treated the way she deserves by a potential romantic partner. And she was kind of infatuated with Hess before they got married, and then he got what he wanted and he didn't care anymore. It is so wholesome to see her get treated the way she deserves to be treated, the way anybody deserves to be treated, but have it work. And once they get over like I'm going to call it minutia. It's not, because it's like, but the real adult life stuff of like, oh, I'm technically married, and like, like all these
married.
Things, like it's all outside factors. Between them, it's easy. Like, they meet, it works. They're both decent people. They fall in love with each other, and that's it. And it's just so wholesome. I loved it. I loved it so much. Like, I was so happy for her. And again, in a different way to the keepers, but she is also an outcast in a way, where she doesn't fit in with the society that she's in. She doesn't have a defined sense of belonging or place, and she gets to find that. She gets to find that she gets to choose that. And so does Cedric. And Cedric is another one, next to Malta probably, that I despised. And then in a very, very few scenes, she turned it around, and I was like, why am I crying for this guy? I hated him 3 chapters ago.
Absolutely. And I actually really like the slow unfolding of Cedric's story. Because you don't realize when you first meet him that he's also being abused by Hest. You don't realize that Hest literally groomed him from being a very young man into being his victim. And that he has as little agency in the situation as Elise. And I so appreciated that slow unfolding as Cedric discovers when his motivations are his own and when the motivations are to please Hest. And that really struck me as being really quite powerful. I mean, when that sort of came to a head, how did you, I mean, I know how I felt about the scene, but when Hest, eventually gets tortured himself, hooray, and taken, hey, I'll accept it. It's not a nice reaction to someone being tortured, but he deserved it. And, he gets there, and we have that face-to-face with the three of them. Were you dreading it? Were you like, oh no? Or, how did you go into that?
I was dreading it a little bit. I didn't know how it was going to play out. I was worried about how it was going to affect Elise and Cedric emotionally, how if Hess was going to try to play mind games. And it was so satisfying for him to have lost all of his power. And for him to realize that he's lost all of his power over either of them. They have made their choices. They have found their place and their people, and they're happy, and he is irrelevant. Oh.
That is how you feel in that moment. Because they have broken those chains of. And again, this is it mirrors life really well, because anyone who's been in a relationship that has that level of control, that has that level of mistreatment, knows how difficult it is to break away from those mental ties, to take back the power in that situation. So watching Cedric and Elise do it together as mutual victims of this person is incredibly uplifting to read. this whole
Absolutely.
survivors together, and
Yeah.
very much survivors together, these two. So I loved that sort of, okay, we're going to look at spousal abuse as well, just on the quiet. I know Evie, our lovely friend of the channel, Evie, she berates me for not warning her about Hest, because I so viscerally hate Kyle from Live Ships that's where my hatred goes. That's where, oh my God, Kyle's the worst ever. And I didn't think to warn her about Hest. But she is quite right. When you consider objectively, he's quite a lot worse than Kyle. But I stand my ground. I actually still think Kyle's worse. Do you have a more hated character between the two, or does Kenneth take it? Or someone else? I mean, it doesn't have to be any of those three.
Oh, there's so many, isn't there?
She does villains incredibly well. She really does.
I see this like back and forth between people being either in the camp Kyle is the worst or Hest is the worst. And I'm not sure, to be honest. I am not sure which one I hate more, because they both are a similar kind of narcissistic, misogynistic, emotionally manipulative, the worst. And I think I hate them equally.
Fair enough.
Kenneth takes it for me. Kenneth is the one. I think we all have the one character, even though we hate like all the terrible people. We all have the one character that just strikes a particular personal note that you can't let go of. And Kenneth, even though obviously he's irredeemable for everyone after Ship of Destiny, but from what I hear about in discussions, he is a fascinating character.
Oh,
and
he
one of
really
the
is.
most well-written characters. But like people see him, like might see him as irredeemable, but also pity him. And I understand that. But I cannot, like, people who perpetuate the cycle of abuse.
Yes.
I can't. It triggers something really, really deep in me, and I can't let it go. I'm like, you had a choice.
Yes.
You had a choice. So yeah, I hate him, and I never liked him. I didn't think he would go as far as he did. But I never liked him because, and I think it was how he thought about Edda specifically. Everything else he was manipulating me out of, but how he treated Edda and how he thought about her in this calculating way, always had me like, but I didn't think he would go as far as he did. And when he does, even with everything we find out about him, fascinated, fantastic, nuanced antagonist. I actually think that calling him a villain is a spoiler. Like when people say, "Oh, the villain in Life Ship," like I'm like, that's a bit of a spoiler, because
it is.
Because a lot of people, like, you're not sure, like, where, like, is he going to flip one way or another?
No, that's true. Yeah. And to be fair, if we went at the very end of the series, and I know that you've done the whole thing, if someone was just going into Life Ships, I certainly wouldn't myself say that Kenneth was an upcoming bad guy. Kyle, absolutely, because I hate him. And people are totally allowed to go into Life Ships hating Kyle. Totally.
Absolutely. And
the man let his son be sold into slavery and then tattooed.
I also the way Kyle is introduced as well, I think is the way Kyle and Kefria are introduced is genius. Life Ship, oh my god, like the way she does Ronica, Kefria, and Althea, and later Malta, like the four women of the Vestrit family dealing with a patriarchal world in four different ways. It's so
I have
good.
goosebumps right now as you say that, because I'm like,
mind-blowing, because like initially, like there's a conversation that Kyle and Kefria have very, very early on. It might be like the first or second time we ever have like encounter Kyle, and he's like talking through, like convincing her, of why he wants to do things the way he wants to do them. And there's a part of you that goes like, oh, maybe he has a point, or I get where he's coming from, and like he's
Yeah.
trying to do his best, even if he's like, approaching it the wrong way, but he's, he comes from whatever. And then a bit later, you're like, you manipulated me. Fuck
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, he really does. And I mean, I grew up in a not good environment. So a lot of his behaviors were familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And with having grown up with that level of manipulation around me, I could see a lot of it in Kyle.
Yeah.
Which, like you said, you meet characters that really resonate with you. That's why I hate Kyle, because I've known Kyle.
Yeah.
And his manipulation of that family goes back years. And this is again why I don't like him so much, because before Ephron dies, he could hide it. He played the game, and he was the good husband, and so he knows it's inappropriate to be the way he is, because he wasn't like that until there wasn't a man who could overrule him.
Because
and at that point, you see his true colors. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that really resonated with me. And then I sort of looked at it again. I have an advantage, and it's a little bit unfair, I think, to some degree, but I see it. You get to see it from so many different angles that you get a very clear picture. And I sort of looked at it one time and I thought, why is Kefria living with her mother? She's married. She has children. Why hasn't she set up her own home? Because Kyle doesn't want her to. He doesn't want her making decisions. He doesn't want her thinking for herself. He wants her to remain a child in her mother's house that he can create the reality around.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute that whole thought formed in its entirety when I thought, why doesn't she have her own house? And it all just coalesced, and I was like, that's why. And the manipulation there is on a level
I never questioned that, and you're so right, of course, because he needs to. He also he wants the ship, so he needs to be close.
Yeah.
To like continue to
right. He needs, when he comes home, to stay in that circle. He doesn't want to be apart from the captain and the captain's wife. He doesn't want this, there's the word, independent. He doesn't want an independent wife who has freedom to make choices while he's not there. So we'll keep all of that together, and we'll convince everyone that's a good idea. And it was honestly a jaw-dropping moment for me when I had that realization. I was like, you asshole. You utter asshole. Because you see it, as soon as he's no longer part of the equation and he's been captured by pirates, you see Kefria come into her own very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Because she isn't used to it. And it takes her a long time to find her grown-up feet, even though she's a mother. And she's not a mother of babies. She's a mother of teenagers. She's a woman in every sense. And yet she's still being Ronica's daughter.
Yeah.
That's who she's identified herself as, rather than Kefria, the woman. And I love her story in Life Ships. It's one of the smaller stories, but it's very empowering to watch her find herself.
It is. That is a bit of extra depth there, like the house and like her being the daughter and like having been manipulated into not wanting independence, or thinking that she doesn't or doesn't need it, or not even questioning it, is again so real, unfortunately.
And Robin Hobb does it so well that she can put these characters in these books and get you to see them in a really clear light without going, I'm going to talk about manipulation in relationships. You never feel that you're being preached to, but you're seeing it absolutely cut and dried on the page. And it takes a talent to do it so clearly without stating it overtly.
Because she puts a character there And
Yeah.
but she is so good at creating that character as a real person and then having them bounce off each other that you're just being shown a situation and you draw your own conclusions.
Mm.
And everybody's conclusions are going to be a bit different, but the gist of what she's trying to say is there because, like you said, because she's so good at making it obvious
Yeah.
that she doesn't have to beat you over the head with it. And it's mind blowing. And like it's one of the it's the main reason that I love the series so much and that I got so attached to it. And particularly the themes in Live Ship and like Althea. Oh, like when she first gets introduced and the first thing I thought was, this is your when did this come out? 1998. This is your I'm not like other girls prototype. This is Arya Stark, you know? And I was like, I would have lapped this up 10 years ago. Fair enough, whatever.
Yeah.
But it is and it isn't. Like, it's not Hob saying, oh, look at this cool girl, as opposed to her brat sister or niece, actually. She's more saying this is one of the ways women in a patriarchal society, young women especially, will try to push against it by kind of setting yourself against what you see as feminine. Whether you identify with that or not doesn't matter. It's just the anti. And then Althea herself evolves through that. And then, like, is it in Madship where she's with the other, coming back on the Ophelia, is it? I think.
Oh, with Bragg, yeah.
Yeah, and he kind of tells her you're not like other girls, and she's like, what does that mean? And I think, and there was a moment where I was like, oh my God, I am Althea. This is me. This is me as a teenager. And she is going through the character development that I went through. And I thought, oh, like, if I had picked these books up when I was a teenager, it would have changed my life. I would have become who I am now sooner. Like, it would have like clicked something into place. This is incredible. And there's a lot of things about Althea's arc and like her experiences that resonated in that way, that I was like, how does this woman like Robin Hobb write as if she's in my brain and knows things that I don't know, that she is telling me about myself?
Yes, very much so. I mean, we've focused a lot around the Beantown side of events. I didn't know until I found BookTube many years after reading and rereading these books. I did not know that Fitz was depressed. I genuinely had no clue because I was depressed. So the way Fitz interacts with people, the thought processes he has, that other people have recognized since day dot. Oh, Fitz is depressed. I didn't see that because it was normal to me.
Yeah.
And only on finding BookTube was I able to take that step back and go, oh, wow. Because she got it exactly right. And I don't know how she does that. I don't.
I got there in Fitz and the Fool.
Yeah.
Because I think, like, we talked about that end of Tawny Man, and like you need to deal with your trauma and your stuff, and so I was like, oh, throughout Tawny Man. So my conclusion was basically throughout Tawny Man, Fitz has been suppressing his trauma and like has been depressed because of that. But depression doesn't just go away because your situation changes or your one specific thing changes, and so it continues in Fitz and the Fool. And what I find so fascinating is like it's there the entire time, but it gets better and worse. Like, there's big portions in Fool's Assassin where he's happy, but he's still struggling with that. Like, even though
he doesn't trust it, he knows it can go away. And again, I
And
relate to that on a profound level.
that is so it's mind blowing how
Hmm.
real she makes it. And I think I've been thinking about this a lot actually, like since finishing the last trilogy specifically. And I want to be careful with how I phrase it because I don't want to make assumptions for anybody else. But I got frustrated with Fitz in the last couple of books, and I'd never been frustrated with him before. Like I
Mm-hmm.
love him, I do, and I know a lot of people get very frustrated with him, like since earlier on.
Mm-hmm.
I never really got frustrated until Fool's Quest, for
Yeah.
like the last two books, and I got to a point where I was like, stop it,
Yeah.
stop
That's
it, like
enough
I
now.
can't. Yeah, enough. Like you have a child, and I think um like depression is very present in my surroundings, like or has been, like in as I was growing up in like my like family surroundings. um so having B's point of view
Yeah.
triggered that frustration for me, as like identifying with B and being like, you need to snap out of it, my dude, like
Yeah.
you
I
please,
need you now. Yeah.
yeah, like somebody shake him. So I think I only got frustrated then, and I didn't realize this until, because I was seeing it as like, oh, why am I enjoying this less? And then I only like a couple of weeks later I realized it was the frustration of somebody within the narrative dealing with somebody like that they love that is
Yeah.
struggling with depression, that like you can't help, and that like frustration of, what do I do? Whatever I do, I like I'm doing something. Like what is happening?
Yeah.
And that struggle was what was frustrating me. Like this constant loop of, yeah, helplessness,
Yeah.
from his perspective and then from B's perspective. And that alone, how do you pull that off without ever spelling it out for
I know.
us?
It is remarkable, like truly remarkable, because she's also doing this as they're both going through grief because they've
Hmm.
both got Molly. So
Yeah,
you have that flavoring all of their interactions as well. And
yeah,
when you also have the trauma of the events at Withywood's, because this wasn't somebody just kidnapping B. They came and assaulted the keep. They've
yeah.
damaged the keep. It's been on fire. They've lost livestock. Girls have been assaulted. Men have been assaulted. People are dead. This isn't a simple kidnapping. So
Hmm.
there's also this really violent event, and both of them are dealing with that as well, because her stories are very real. People don't just cope with one thing at a time, and
Yeah.
everything becomes entwined as you go through life. You're still dealing with this thing, and something new happens, and okay, now I've got to deal with that as well. She still manages to get all of those factors in while having B sound like a little girl.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't know how she does that. It's amazing.
Ah, B. Okay, B.
Did you know? I have to know. Was B spoiled for you, or were
No,
you able to be surprised?
I had no
Yes.
idea. Yeah, I had
I'm
no
so proud
idea.
of our fandom. Very few people
Oh,
get spoiled on it. Yes.
I am shocked because to be fair, like I don't watch reviews even if it's non-spoiler before I read a book, especially if it's
Mhm.
like further on in a series, because I know some people wouldn't consider that a spoiler. I would say like, oh yeah, because the third trilogy is like Fitz dealing with fatherhood. No, I don't want to know that.
Yeah.
So I didn't know. When I turned the page and I realized we were getting a B point of view, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And that is probably one of my favorite chapters in the 16
Yeah.
books, like that first B chapter. And she instantly became a favorite character, and like, a favorite character of all time, even like outside of
Yeah.
the realm of the Elderlings. Is she has such a fresh perspective on Fitz while still very much being his daughter and Molly's daughter, and like and she has her own, like, the whole white prophet thing going on, but she is Fitz's kid, and you can tell. And like her experiencing Fitz's grief and like
Oh,
feeling lonely and like feeling separated from him was so heartbreaking, and like him being so helpless and not knowing how to deal with the child from B's perspective, while we know that he has good intentions and that he loves her and
yeah,
that he's trying, was so heartbreaking. But also just her being different. And
yeah,
as I think a lot of us have that in common in some way, shape, or form of another, of like growing up feeling a little bit alienated for whatever reason. Um, and I latched onto that
yeah,
immediately. But she is so capable, but nobody believes that she's capable because her brain works a bit differently,
yeah,
which I immediately related to in terms of being autistic. Of
yeah.
like, why am I different? Why does everybody seem to agree with this without saying it out loud? Um,
Yes.
and they think I'm the stupid one. Like,
Yeah. Where is the disconnect here? Because
yeah,
I don't see it. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, B was a delight, an absolute delight. When you, as you say, you turn the page and you realize you're in a new POV. And I think, I mean, it was such a risk when you
yeah,
consider at this point, we've gone 13 books and we've found the winning formula. Okay, hey, we're going to follow Fitz, we're going to close out the story. And she introduces a new POV in a series that has only ever had one POV, and it's Fitz.
hmm,
That's a hell of a risk to take because it could have
yeah,
gone horribly wrong.
yeah,
But as you say, she immediately grabs you, this character, and you immediately feel for her. And you're like, oh, this is amazing. I loved finally seeing Fitz from outside, and that we can kind of guess how other people see him by the way they treat him, but we don't really know. To
hmm,
see it from B, to see how he appears and how obvious his love for Molly was, even to a child, to see how withdrawn he was from everybody else, to see how protective he is, and to see that he actually comes across as this really lovely guy. You know,
yeah,
where we've had his own inner thoughts for however many books going, I'm awful, I'm useless, I'm this, I'm that, and the other.
yeah,
That was remarkable. To
yeah,
finally get that rounded out with B was just, oh,
yeah.
so beautiful.
So beautiful. And
Mm.
Wolf Father.
I know. I mean, what a wonderful way to let you know that yes, you felt like Night Eyes has still been part of the story, but he hasn't actually gone anywhere. Oh,
Beautiful.
how
Like
long did it take you before you thought it is actually an entity? It's not just a dream. It is actually an entity.
it did take me a while. I think it
Mm.
was not fully until after she's kidnapped
Mhm.
and Wolf Father is still talking to her, and I was like, okay, no, this is like actually an essence of Night Eyes somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think ever since I clocked that, I was getting emotional every time he was on the page.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, and why wouldn't you? He's amazing. Um, I like the fact that it very subtly sort of says he's part of her fathering as well. So
Hmm.
we get Fool explain how Fool is part of the process of creating B, in that they shared essences, as you say, at the end of Fool's Fate, when
Hmm.
they're exchanging into the different bodies. Whereas Fitz has always been fused with Night Eyes since sharing
Hmm.
a body with Night Eyes. So in the same way that that Fool's essence is part of Fitz, so is Night Eyes. So
Which
she
makes
doesn't
sense.
just have two fathers; she has three, and so her courage in those life and death situations where she does just go, well, I've got to get out of it alive. I don't care, is very wolfish,
Hmm.
you know, and she does become very almost bestial where she will bite, to harm. And it's like she can write these things and not state it overtly, but it's there on the page.
Yeah.
And if you see it, great. If you don't, it doesn't matter if you catch it or not. But if you do, it's there. And I love that, because when we do hear Wolffather talk to her, she gets it immediately. She's like, yep, I am a wolf cub. That's what I'm going to be right now.
Yeah. Oh,
love it so much.
The series really, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir because you don't need me to tell you. It has endless rereadability because of things like this. I am so excited that I get to reread this series for the rest of my life.
Oh, absolutely. And I tell people, and I'm not ever sure that people really believe me, but I genuinely get something new every time I read these books, whether it's a new lens because I've heard somebody else talk about it and they've considered it in a way I haven't considered, or it's a little piece like it fell into place about Kefria not having her own home.
Yeah.
There's always something that I will pick up new when I read through again. Things are, I mean, I was where you mentioned on Discord a little while ago. Was it you? No, it wasn't. Someone else. Someone in Mike's Discord is going through Assassin's Fate at the moment. And they asked the question, hang on, does this mean the servants have always been the antagonists? Because the pale woman was theirs and she was in Farseer, and the servants were the ones behind by knocking out the dragons and the Elderlings. And have they been this? And I'm like, this is why the reread is incredible. Because, I mean, the series is called The Realm of the Elderlings, and really it's only Fits in the Fall where you see where the Elderlings fit in.
Yeah.
And yet, when you go back and you read, they have been there the whole time. The bones of the story were never hidden. The interference of the servants is never hidden. And it's only when you understand it, that perspective, that knowledge of other events, that makes it clear. So that first reread is like reading the series you just read all over again with the same level of newness, because it's a new story now. Everything means something different. And it's incredible. I heartily recommend at least rereading once, because for the amount of joy you just had, you get to do it again.
I am so excited for my first reread. I actually I had to stop myself. I'm a huge rereader. I reread a lot. So often when I find a new favorite, I finish it and I start it again.
Yeah.
And ever since being on BookTube, I reread a bit less because I want, first of all,
there's so much good stuff out.
I've just, ever since finding BookTube, more so than being on it, my TBR is just completely out of control, more so than it has ever been in my life. I mean, there was always going to be a huge list of books, but now it's just growing exponentially every day. So I just want to read new things. However, I had to physically stop myself from from picking up Ship of Magic the moment I finished Ship of Destiny, and I was like, at least finish Realm of the Elderlings.
Well, yeah. And one thing I do really like is it isn't until you get to Tourneyman Afterlife Ships that you really get the closure to Kenneth's story, when you understand that someone can be partially forged and you recognize that's what's happened to Fitz. And that's what it's like when people have read Life Ships and they want to talk about Kenneth. I was like, you still haven't quite got the complete picture. You need that understanding that comes in Tourneyman to really see what Kenneth was, which was this partially forged person.
Yeah, and, which is really just hammering
in Life Ships, because they haven't made the connection between the memory removal for the forged and the wizardhood. And there are so many moments in Tourneyman that really do complete that arc. I said to you earlier that I recommend people take a break after Tawny Man before going into Raymond. It's because of that shift in tone, and because it does change pace. You go from this beautiful ending to that first arc to a new beginning. And I for those who have read A Song of Ice and Fire, I compare it to going into Feast for Crows after reading Storm Swords, and that you've had this completion of so many arcs. The story's continuing, but so many of those initial plot points have now been closed off. And then you're going into a new lot of characters, and so many people are not a fan of Feast for Crows until the reread, when they know what's coming. Like, no, now I can appreciate it for what it is instead of hating it for what it's not.
Yeah.
And, so you have that different tone. I'm going to shift the tone a little bit here and go, I'm with Evie on a point that she makes where she wishes Molly had grieved longer or more prevalently on page for Boric, because he isn't really a presence between she and Fitz after that point. And she would have been, I think, far more affected by Boric's death than she appears on page, because we don't see her during the courting time from Fitz. But losing Boric the way we did absolutely broke my heart. First off, he dies off page, which was really, really sad. Although I kind of like
Patience.
And and I was going to say, and then Patience. I still haven't forgiven her for Patience. I get it literally, because Molly goes in the following chapter, and you need that grief for Molly. If I'd spent all that grief on Patience, I probably wouldn't have had as much left for Molly, and that needed to be the moment that was emotional. So I get it, but I don't forgive it.
Yeah,
because I adore Patience.
Oh, me too.
I adore her, and I do like that we got a couple of little snippets of memory of how she was with the boys. That she was herself to the very end, hollering at people out of windows, and I love that. I just love that for her. But losing Boric was really hard. The reuniting moment of Fitz and Boric remains one of my favourite positive moments, and other people like the reveal of Fitz at Buckkeep is one of their favourite moments. And there are a lot of beautiful moments in these books. What was the one that got you? What was the one that you were like, this is the moment that I have been waiting for? Did you have one of those?
Have to think about that, because there are many, and I don't want to forget an obvious one.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm not asking what is the obvious one. I'm asking what is the one that, when I say that to you, what is the one that you immediately comes to mind that goes, that is the one that I felt?
Funnily enough, the one that's coming to mind, definitely, the Fitz and Bjork reuniting, and Fitz becoming Fitz chivalry Farseer again, are definitely up there. But the one that is just coming to mind that had me crying, and it was not sad crying, was, funnily enough, not Fitz, which I'm not surprised that it's not Fitz that's coming to mind. But Perseverance being the one that saves B, that finds B.
Yes. Yeah, Perseverance is wonderful. He's absolutely wonderful. Again, one of the most recent, most new characters who steals your heart. Perseverance is just, what
How
an
does she
amazing
do
young
it?
woman. I don't know.
I can't believe she introduced new characters in the last trilogy, and they're B and Perseverance. I would die for that child. Oh my God.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having a moment. her and B are what Boric and Patience could have been. She's even a noble.
Oh my God.
Because he's so like Boric. Oh, I've got
And
chills.
she's
Oh,
literally Patience. Well, she's Patience's grandchild by adoption.
yeah. Oh, I've got chills. Sorry, that literally just occurred to me. Wow.
That is so cute.
I don't know if you've ever had really short hair, but I can feel the hair on my head standing up after having had that. My whole head is tingling as the hair on my head stands up. That is.
Oh, I love that.
Oh, that works. That really works.
That has to be intentional.
Surely
It has to be, because he's not just the stable boy because he's said to be really good with it as well. Like, oh, the scene actually where
he even raised her horse.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Where she like they come back to Bookkeep, right, when we think Fitz is dead the first time.
Yeah.
and everything's like back to normal, and like he's not meant to talk to her anymore, and she says, I only want her to take care of my horse, and and then they go out riding, and she starts racing away because she knows he's going to be the one to follow.
Yeah, and it is just so beautiful. Oh,
my heart.
Oh, I've made my own day. I love
that.
Oh, I love that so much. Oh,
you're so right. That's an intentional parallel for sure.
It must be. Oh, I mean, hey, even if it's not, I'm taking it as it is. As though that's my new headcanon. Absolutely.
It works. That is adorable. Oh my God.
I'm a fan. I'm here for it. See, one of my favourite moments, along with the reuniting with Boric on Aslivia, is B meeting Thick, where she can hear the music and she follows the music. And that made me bawl. Like I was about to quote it, but I can't because I can feel the tears. I can't do it, but I have to, because when he says, I made this, I can't. I made the music. I made the music for Fitz's little girl.
Yeah. That actually made me cry as well. Yeah. Just so, because Thick is so pure.
Yeah.
And so is B. And again, Thick is somebody who nobody takes seriously. But Fitz did.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite moments.
Yeah.
It's just one of those little private moments that aren't huge in terms of plots. They're not important to the storyline as such, but they give you the heart of what it's about. And it's seeing people for who they are and treasuring them for who they are. And I love that so much.
She's so good at the small moments. Speaking of smaller moments, actually, because I now have Perseverance in my head. Every time that Fitz tries to get rid of him and send him home, and Perseverance says, "You can't release me from my service because I'm sworn to be," and she is the one that can really. Oh.
Yeah, and he's just such an honourable young man. I just adore him, and this is the thing. People talk about the stupid naming conventions. I love them because Perseverance perseveres.
Yeah,
the most fundamental part of his soul.
Yeah,
you know.
I love the naming conventions. Some of the names get a bit ridiculous, but the ones like I really like it, and I like the way sometimes it works out that the person is that, like perseverance, that is his defining quality. That
It
is,
really is.
he lives up to his name. But then
Yeah.
for others, it says more about the parent than it does about the
Yeah. It
child. And
tells
the
you
child,
something. It's giving you
yes. Like, I think
context
Regal,
almost.
yes, Regal, I think, is a great one. Where I've heard people say, like, oh, and Regal is not Regal. I'm like, that's the point.
It
Like,
actually is. No, he is.
he,
There's nothing about being regal that says you have to be good. Regal
yeah,
is the appearance of power, it's the
he is
appearance of wealth.
behaving.
And
Yeah.
that's what he does.
He behaves the way he behaves to what he considers to be regal. And it
Yeah.
speaks to Queen Desires, that she wanted him to be the heir, so she named him Regal because she was
Uh,
projecting something onto him. It
yeah.
makes so much sense.
It
So
really
much
does.
sense.
And again, her name in itself tells you that she just wants things. You know,
Yeah,
we hear that she had an addictive personality, that her drug use drove her to death eventually, but that she clearly was wanting things. She seemed to be a very grasping character. And what's fascinating is that we are still learning about Queen Desire, who we never meet
yeah,
in the final trilogy, where we're getting letters from her to other people and we're
yeah,
getting a more nuanced view of who she was. And it's just,
yeah,
we find out that the name that Patience pins on Fitz as her page when she says, I'm going to call you Tom. And he's so offended that she's just tagged the name onto him. And we find out years later, from Fitz's perspective, that that's what his father called him in his letters to Verity. And just like, to suddenly get that meaning so many years later
yeah,
was just, so beautiful.
yeah,
Because from Fitz's perspective, she just dumped a name on him. From Patience's, she was claiming him.
yeah.
She was saying, no, I've always known about you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it meant such completely different things to them both in that moment. It's remarkable how well she
It
can show
really
you
is.
that.
Yeah.
Just, I just,
Patience, the way like you make assumptions about Patience before you meet her, like she is she's gonna be the scorned wife, or she's gonna hate her husband's bastard, and like you expect her to be a bit of, I expect her to be like, Catelyn Stark or whatever,
yeah,
um and then you meet her, and I remember something that Jimmy said. I don't remember if it was in his review or in a discussion or something, and I always think of it now when I think about how we meet Patience. She describes her room, and
yeah,
by describing her room, we learn the basics about who she is and so much about her personality. And then she
yeah,
turns out to be not at all who you would assume she would be. And yet still Fitz is wary of her. And yeah, you have these things like she's just dumping the name on me, like whatever. And then throughout the first trilogy, you learn just how much she cares. And then when she thinks he's dead, like, oh my God, and that she sees him as her son the entire
yeah.
time.
It's the measure of a series I can read this many times and still cry quoting it. It's she gets emotional, and when she just suddenly breaks down in Assassin's Quest and runs out of the room, going, "You should have been mine,"
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
because she desperately wanted a child. We hear very early on that they weren't able to have a child. Chivalry and Patience, and because Fitz exists, the issue isn't with chivalry. So
Mm-hmm.
she has clearly felt the pressure as a noble woman who married to the freaking heir to the throne. She can't have children. That is some pressure. This woman is under some pressure to get pregnant and hasn't been able to. So to know that she would have welcomed Fitz hurts that little bit more.
Yeah.
That it could have been, it's that, if everything goes to, ideally, the world would be a wonderful place, because ideally, Fitz would have been welcomed in, he'd have been recognised, he would have been the next heir, blah, 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 blah. And the tragedy of it not lining up, the tragedy of things falling the way it did is literally heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It just breaks my heart. It's something that when we meet Burrick again in Golden Fall and we see him approaching Kettricken trying to take Swift home, because no, I don't want him to be outwardly witted. He's going to come home and he's going to keep it in check until I have no control over him anymore. And you're like, Burrick, that's an awful thing to do to your son. But he thinks Fitz is dead. And he's lived all of those years believing that the wit is what killed this boy that he raised. And now his own son is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's terrified he's going to lose another son to this same thing. So it's where he possibly would have softened in his stance with the wit had he known Fitz had survived and, you know, been able to achieve these wonderful things. Instead, he's believed him dead, and he's hardened in that belief that the wit is what caused it, and become less and less flexible in his belief that you should, you know, allow that part of yourself to be open. And those things, as a parent, you have to sort of watch and go, yeah, you know, you've got to remember the bigger picture and go, society might say this, but what's best for my child is actually to be allowed to be themselves and to encourage them to flourish in whatever aspects they want to flourish in. And it's painful to read that from Burridge, because you know it's so not who we want him to be. We don't want him to be like that with Swift, but he has really valid reason.
Yeah, I think something that always gets to me throughout the entire series is realizing just how much the people that were adults in Farseer cared about Fitz. Because he doesn't see it.
No, he's completely oblivious.
He doesn't see it. He doesn't believe it. He feel, and like, you understand why, because he is a child, and if you don't make it obvious, the child's not going to pick up on it.
That's right.
But the fact that Patience sees him as a son and would have from the beginning if given the chance. The fact that Burrick sees him as his son, the fact that like how much Verity cares for him, like he is his nephew and he never sees him as a bastard. Like she's just his nephew. Chade, like all of these people love Fitz, and for slightly different reasons are unable to care for him in the way that they would want to in a perfect world. And learning and having Fitz learn how much they love him gets me every time.
It really does. And again, true to life, some of these things he doesn't figure out until after they're gone. And again, that's one of those really true to life tragedies that we have all experienced, that we lose somebody that we thought was important, but didn't realize how big a part that we were in their lives. And that can be really quite profound. When Kettricken, Fitz's relationship with Kettricken is one that is written with an incredible amount of nuance when you take into account how young they were when they met, when you take into account her genuine love for Verity, when you take just everything they went through into account, the nuances of that relationship are beautiful. So to come back to it at the end of Assassin's Fate, to see Kettricken and how she saw it, was just incredible. Absolutely incredible. When she says to him, I always knew. You know, and to have Night Eyes declare,
yes,
I would have chosen you for us. Reading Assassin's Quest is going to hit different. It's going to hit different knowing that.
And that is might be
Yeah.
the one that I'm most excited to reread, because I know that everything we learn afterwards will make it so much better, because he's in Kelsangara, and I was like
Yeah.
we don't know what it is when you're first there, and I was like, what is this? Like, is this a dream? Like, is this real?
Yeah.
Like, can we please keep going? Like, what? And I cannot wait to reread that, knowing what it is and what it becomes.
Exactly. Yeah. And how key it is to the whole story, and how many answers were there, for
Yeah.
them to have just kept going past it. Oh, oh, just so good. So good. So, yes. So, I mean, we've been going almost 2 hours, so we'll bring it quickly. I mean, and there's still many things we haven't even touched on. So, we can have more of these discussions should they
Yes,
be
we can make a
necessary.
part 2 and a part 3.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always a gush fest happening on my channel. But when we get to the very, very end, and we've got everybody at the quarry in that beautiful circle of the story, bringing it back to that quarry, and we're getting the wolf being carved.
Oh.
How did you feel? I mean, was that like, okay, I got pissed off with the fake out death, we're going to die, but now we're not going to die, but now we're dying. We're in the quarry, we're dying. Is that where you saw Fitz's story ending?
So I didn't really, I consciously did not ask myself what I thought was going to happen before going into Fitz and the Fool. So I mean, I knew that like people from Liveship were going to show up, and I knew that it was going to be a crossover. But like, in terms of how is the story going to end, I didn't really spend much time thinking about it, because I didn't want to guess anything. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about whether Fitz would survive or not. And I think as I was reading Assassin's Fate, I started to realize this is going to be the end of his story. Because of course, this is his entire life. He's now older. Like, this is the only way it can end, really, is with him dying. Um Obviously it could be a case of, 20 years later he died of old age, or but it's one way or another, it's probably going to happen. So when his first death, I believed it. Especially, and it works because we have B. So
Yeah.
sure, it could be that you have a chunk of book where Fitz is dead, and now we're moving on. And I was heartbroken about him dying alone in a tunnel.
Yeah.
Um and something about it didn't feel quite right. I was like, Fitz deserved better than this. It's heartbreaking because he deserved better than this, and
Yeah.
in
It's
that way,
it's
it's like God's
cruel.
way
It's
to
like,
do.
really? You're gonna kill him
Yeah,
like this? Yeah.
yeah. I was a bit like, "Ugh,
Yeah.
and then moving on, but also like, and then when it turns out that he's not yet dead, even though I had believed it, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Um, but then she gave me hope that he wasn't going to die, or at least not in a horrible way. And the fact that it was the dart, and coming back to
Yeah. The
the
traitor's death.
parasites of the,
Mm.
and I was like, oh my god, I should have
And
seen
that
this.
Night Eyes knew. Night Eyes kept telling him, we have worms.
Yeah,
Night Eyes knew.
and
And
I
oh,
couldn't believe it. I should have known. I should have known. It was telegraphed. I should have known, and I didn't. He didn't. Fooled again. So the moment I realized that, which was kind of when Fitz realized it, because I'm just as dumb as Fitz when he's writing.
no, we're all in denial. We were just all
Yeah.
in denial. Like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Oh, I was like, oh, this is a completely different brand of cruel. I
Yeah.
thought I was starting to make my peace with him dying alone in a collapsed tunnel, thinking that at least he got to save B, and now it turns out that has this horrible death waiting for him. And then he goes to the quarry, and when I realized what it was that he was doing, and when I realized it was a wolf,
Yeah.
I had to put the book down.
Yeah.
It's
That was for
perfect.
me almost beautiful, because at that point, my first read, I'm like, oh, she's prophesized the wolf.
Yeah.
it was just that moment. And yeah, but it was just so heartbreaking because we see Verity's side of things from when Verity put himself into the dragon, when Ketrican comes and tells him her story, and she's beside herself that she's lost their baby, and it's all incredibly emotional for her, and he just sits there and listens. It's like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, that's awful, Verity. Come on. And you're very much feeling for Ketrican in that moment. When we come to Fitz's end and we see what that is, where he's literally got nothing left to feel with, you understand how Verity felt, where he knows he should respond, but he's got nothing to respond with.
Yeah, because it's all in the dragon.
He's given it all into the stone, and to be getting insights about a book 13 books ago,
yeah,
crazy. It's been incredibly powerful, and
yeah,
to know as the story falls out. I mean, we haven't even talked about Nettle. Is
oh my god.
There's so many aspects to the story, but his girls know that he loved them and properly know that, he hasn't just said words, he's let them know how he feels, that she's got people who understand her gifts, and that her care has been given to Ketrican is what gets me. Like, of all of the people, oh my God, another parallel. Sorry. Because B could have been Ketrican's. You could have been mine moment. Oh, I'm on fire today.
Of all things, a parallel to patience.
Yeah. Wow. Who would have just adored B?
Yeah. No, it's...
Oh, I'm going to cry again now. Well, anyway.
It's perfect. It's perfect. I thought the ending in terms of Fitz was perfect and heartbreaking in the best way, but in the way that really made sense. It had to end with Fitz's death, and I could not have predicted a better one. It was a horrible one, but better thematically, and like to bring the whole thing like together, and then B going to the Mountain Kingdom with Ketrican, and Fitz and Night Eyes and the Fool all being together in the stone.
Yeah, because they were always one entity.
Yeah,
it's just beautiful. So I think on that note, we might close this out, and I shall let you get to bed, because I imagine it's getting quite late there now. And,
it is 11. I am going to go to bed. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can tell Carlos he can take off his headphones because he can hear things again now. And and I have no doubt that we shall talk more in the future about these things. And
please, yeah.
So thank you so much for joining me. You have been a fabulous guest, and have helped lead me to completely new conclusions and given me the chills. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on. I feel like now I have properly completed my first read of the Realm of the Elderlings.
Okay, I hereby stamp approved on your first journey through. There you go. You've had your passport stamped on your journey through Realm of the Elderlings. You've reached the destination. So with that, we're going to love you and leave you. Look after yourselves, everybody, and